The dust-laden wind carried a haunting melody that wrapped around Eliza Edelmann like a desperate embrace, just as it had every evening since her arrival in Copper Creek. It was 1878, and the small mining town perched on the edge of the Arizona Territory was as unforgiving as the desert that surrounded it. Eliza had become accustomed to moving through life unnoticed, a skill she'd perfected after years of being the forgotten daughter of a wealthy Boston businessman who had shipped her west after her mother's death. No one looked at her, truly looked at her, and she'd begun to wonder if she was slowly fading from existence altogether. Eliza stood at the edge of the boardwalk, clutching her worn leather-bound journal to her chest as the townsfolk bustled past her without a sideways glance. Her simple gray dress blended perfectly with the weathered wood of the buildings, making her feel like another piece of the dusty landscape. The setting sun painted everything in golden hues, but even its warm light couldn't penetrate the invisible barrier she felt separating her from the world. "Miss, you're standing right where my post is going," came a deep voice from behind her. Startled, Eliza nearly dropped her journal as she spun around, coming face to face with the town's newest arrival. He stood a head taller than her, his broad shoulders casting a long shadow across the planked walkway. His face was partially hidden beneath the brim of a well-worn Stetson, but she could see the strong line of his jaw, softened by several days' worth of stubble. I'm sorry," she stammered, taking a step backward. "I didn't realize I was in anyone's way." The man's expression shifted, his eyes a startling shade of blue focusing entirely on her face. "No harm done," he said, his voice gentler now. "Just need to get this support beam in before nightfall." He nodded toward a wooden post resting on the ground beside him. Eliza stepped aside quickly, expecting him to continue with his work and forget her presence as everyone else did. Instead, he removed his hat, revealing a shock of sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Name's Adam Vaughn," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Just took over blacksmithing duties from old Tucker." Eliza stared at his outstretched hand for a moment, shocked that this stranger was actually initiating a conversation with her. "Eliza Edelmann," she replied softly, placing her small hand in his. The warmth of his grip sent an unfamiliar sensation racing up her arm. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Edelmann. You been in Copper Creek long?" "Almost a year," she answered, wondering why he was bothering with small talk. Didn't he realize she wasn't worth noticing? "I work at the schoolhouse." Adam's eyebrows rose slightly. "The schoolteacher? Well, now that explains the careful way you speak. Proper Boston accent, if I'm not mistaken." Eliza felt a flush creep up her neck. "I'm just the assistant. Miss Hargrove is the teacher." "Still impressive work," he said, his eyes not leaving hers. "Must take a special kind of patience to handle all those mining and ranching children." The way he looked at her as though he could see every detail, every flaw and feature made Eliza uncomfortable in a way she couldn't quite define. It had been so long since anyone had truly seen her that his attention felt like standing too close to a fire after being in the cold. "I should go," she said suddenly, clutching her journal tighter. "Miss Hargrove expects me to prepare tomorrow's lessons." Adam nodded, but there was something in his expression that suggested he wasn't just letting her walk away and forget their interaction. "Hope to see you around town, Miss Edelmann." As Eliza hurried down the boardwalk toward the small room she rented above the general store, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in her world. That cowboy blacksmith had looked at her as though she were the only person on the street, as though she were visible after all. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. The kind of autumn day that hinted at the coming winter without fully committing to it. Eliza rose early, as was her habit, and prepared herself for another day of helping at the schoolhouse. Her room was modest but neat, with a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a single chair that sat beneath the window overlooking the main street. She ran a brush through her chestnut hair, twisting it into its usual practical bun at the nape of her neck. As she made her way down the back stairs of the general store, she could already hear Mrs. Potts shuffling around the kitchen, preparing breakfast for her boarders. "Morning, Mrs. Potts," Eliza said quietly as she entered the kitchen. The older woman startled slightly. "Goodness, child, you move like a ghost. Didn't hear you coming down those stairs at all." "I'm sorry," Eliza apologized automatically, though it wasn't the first time someone had commented on her ability to move through spaces unnoticed. Mrs. Potts waved a flour-covered hand. "Nothing to be sorry about. Just sit yourself down and have some breakfast. Can't teach children on an empty stomach." Eliza obediently took her usual seat at the far end of the long table, where the other boarders rarely bothered to sit. She ate her porridge in silence, listening to the idle chatter of the two miners who lived in the rooms across from hers. They nodded in her general direction, but didn't engage her in conversation, which suited Eliza fine. She'd grown accustomed to being overlooked. The walk to the schoolhouse took exactly 7 minutes if she maintained her brisk pace. Eliza enjoyed these morning walks, watching as the town slowly came to life around her. She passed by the sheriff's office, where Deputy Wilson was already sweeping the boardwalk, and the doctor's home, where a light burned in the window, suggesting he'd been called out during the night. When she reached the blacksmith shop, Eliza slowed her pace unconsciously. The forge wasn't yet lit, but she could see movement inside the open doors. Before she could hurry past, Adam Vaughn stepped out into the morning light, wiping his hands on a rag tucked into his belt. "Morning, Miss Edelmann," he called, his voice carrying easily across the quiet street. Eliza froze, surprised again that he'd not only seen her, but remembered her name. "Good morning, Mr. Vaughn," she replied, the formal address feeling stiff on her tongue. "Beautiful day," he commented, walking toward her with an easy confidence. "Almost makes a man forget he's got a day's work ahead of him." "I suppose it is nice," she admitted, glancing at the clear blue sky. She wasn't used to making small talk, and found herself at a loss for what to say next. Adam seemed unbothered by her awkwardness. "I was wondering if you might know where I could find some decent books in this town. Been meaning to do some reading in the evenings." Eliza blinked in surprise. "Books?" "Yes, madam. Words on pages bound together," he teased gently. "I find myself with time to spare, and I'd rather fill it with something useful than cards and whiskey." "The schoolhouse has a small library," Eliza found herself saying. "Miss Hargrove allows adults to borrow books if they're careful with them. I could show you sometime." Adam's smile deepened, creating creases at the corners of his eyes. "That would be mighty kind of you. Perhaps after school hours today?" Eliza nodded before she could think better of it. "We finish at 3. I'll be there at 1:15, he said, tipping his hat to her. "Have a good day with the little ones, Miss Edelmann." As she continued her walk to the schoolhouse, Eliza felt a curious lightness in her step. The feeling was so unfamiliar that it took her several moments to recognize it as anticipation. The schoolhouse was already bustling with activity when Eliza arrived. Miss Hargrove, a stern woman in her 40s, who had been teaching in frontier towns for nearly 2 decades, was writing arithmetic problems on the blackboard while the children settled into their desks. "You're late, Miss Edelmann," Miss Hargrove said, without turning around. Eliza glanced at the clock on the wall. "I'm sorry, Miss Hargrove. It won't happen again." "See that it doesn't. The younger students need their reading lesson prepared." Eliza moved to the back of the one-room schoolhouse where the primers were stored. As she gathered the materials for the day's lessons, she couldn't help but notice how the children, much like the adults in town, rarely acknowledged her presence. They answered her questions during lessons, of course, but their eyes often slid past her, seeking out Miss Hargrove's approval instead. The only exception was little Sarah Jenkins, a quiet 7-year-old with bright red hair and a sprinkling of freckles across her nose. Sarah often lingered after lessons to help Eliza clean the slates or arrange books. And today was no different. "Miss Edelmann," Sarah whispered as they organized readers for the next day, "is it true there's a new blacksmith in town?" Eliza nodded. "Yes, his name is Mr. Vaughn. He's taken over from Mr. Tucker." Sarah's eyes widened. "My papa says he fought in the war and then was a cowboy with a big ranch in Texas." "Is that so?" Eliza replied, wondering how much of the town gossip was accurate. Adam didn't strike her as the boastful type who would spread tales of his past. "Papa says he's a real gentleman, too, not like some of the rough men who come through." Sarah leaned closer. "And he's not married." Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Sarah Jenkins, that's hardly appropriate conversation." The little girl grinned mischievously. "My mama says he's handsome enough to make a lady forget her prayers." "That's quite enough," Eliza said firmly, though she couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. "Please finish sorting those readers, and then you should be on your way home." As Sarah returned to her task, Eliza found herself glancing at the clock more often than usual. The hours seemed to crawl by, and by the time the last child had been dismissed, her nerves were drawn as tight as fiddle strings. Miss Hargrove departed promptly at 3, leaving Eliza to tidy the schoolhouse, as she always did. Precisely 15 minutes later, a knock sounded at the door. Adam stood on the steps, hat in hand, his work clothes exchanged for a clean shirt and trousers. His hair was damp, suggesting he'd taken the time to wash away the day's grime. "Hope I'm not too early," he said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice that hadn't been there earlier. "You're right on time," Eliza replied, stepping back to allow him inside. "The library isn't much, but we do have a variety of books." She led him to the small alcove at the rear of the schoolhouse where 3 bookshelves stood filled with donated volumes. Adam moved among them with reverence, his fingers tracing the spines with surprising gentleness. "Quite a collection for a frontier town," he remarked. "Do you have a favorite?" Eliza hesitated, then reached for a worn copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. "This one," she admitted. "I've read it 3 times since arriving in Copper Creek." Adam took the book, turning it over in his hands. "A tale of revenge and redemption," he said knowingly. "I read it years ago, during quieter moments in the war." "You fought?" Eliza asked, recalling Sarah's words. "Union cavalry," he confirmed. "Not something I speak of often." There was a weight to his words that told Eliza not to press further. Instead, she asked, "What sort of books do you prefer, Mr. Vaughn?" "Adam, please," he said. "And I enjoy histories, adventures, stories that take you somewhere else for a while." He paused, looking at her directly. "Though I suspect you understand that need better than most." His observation struck too close to the truth, and Eliza turned away, pretending to straighten books that were already perfectly aligned. "Books have always been good companions," she said carefully. "Better than people sometimes," Adam agreed, selecting a volume of Thoreau's works. "This should keep me occupied for a few evenings." As he signed his name in the lending ledger, Adam's voice took on a casual tone that didn't quite mask his interest. "I wonder, Miss Edelmann, if you might consider joining me for dinner at the hotel restaurant tomorrow evening? I'm still finding my way around town, and I'd appreciate the company of someone who knows it better than I do." Eliza stared at him, certain she must have misheard. No one in Copper Creek had ever invited her to dine with them. That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose on your time." Adam's expression softened. "It would be my pleasure, not an imposition, unless you'd rather not, of course." "No, Eliza stopped, gathering her courage. "I would like that, thank you." "Excellent. Shall we say 6 o'clock? I can meet you at Mrs. Potts's boarding house." After Adam left, Eliza sat at one of the student desks, her mind whirling with confusion. Why had this stranger, taken such an interest in her? She had nothing to offer, no beauty or fortune or social standing. She was just Eliza Edelmann, the invisible assistant teacher who moved through life unnoticed. Yet the way Adam looked at her made her feel anything but invisible. It was as disconcerting as it was exhilarating. That evening, as Eliza prepared for bed, she found herself standing before the small mirror above her dresser, really looking at her reflection for the first time in months. Her face was thinner than she remembered, her cheekbones more pronounced, giving her a delicate appearance that she'd never considered attractive. Her eyes, a warm hazel that shifted between green and brown, depending on the light, seemed larger without the fullness in her cheeks. "What does he see?" she whispered to her reflection, which offered no answers. News traveled quickly in small towns, and by noon the next day, Eliza could feel curious eyes following her as she supervised the children's midday meal break in the schoolyard. Miss Hargrove had given her a particularly pointed look when Mrs. Jenkins had stopped by to deliver Sarah's forgotten lunch pail, and had mentioned seeing Eliza with that handsome new blacksmith at the schoolhouse. "I do hope you remember your position in this community, Miss Edelmann," Miss Hargrove had said afterward. "As educators, we must maintain the highest standards of propriety." "Of course, Miss Hargrove," Eliza had replied, mortified that her simple interaction with Adam had already become fodder for town gossip. Mr. Vaughn merely wished to borrow a book. The older woman's expression had suggested she didn't entirely believe this explanation, but she hadn't pressed further. By the time 6 o'clock approached, Eliza had nearly convinced herself to send a note to Adam, canceling their dinner. What had she been thinking, agreeing to such a public engagement? She wasn't the sort of person people noticed, let alone dined with at the town's finest establishment. She stood before her wardrobe, staring at the limited selection of dresses she owned. None seemed appropriate for a dinner at the hotel restaurant. Finally, she settled on her best dress, a deep blue wool that she typically reserved for Sunday services. It was simple but well made, a parting gift from her father's housekeeper when she'd left Boston. As she pinned her hair, leaving a few soft curls framing her face instead of the severe bun she usually wore, a knock sounded at her door. "Miss Edelmann," Mrs. Potts called. "There's a gentleman here for you." Taking a deep breath, Eliza opened the door. Mrs. Potts stood in the hallway, her expression a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "He's waiting in the parlor, dear," the older woman said, eyeing Eliza's attire with interest. "My, don't you look lovely tonight?" Eliza murmured her thanks and made her way down the stairs, her heart beating so loudly she was certain Adam would hear it from across the room. He stood when she entered the parlor, and the appreciation in his gaze made her flush. "Miss Edelmann," he said, his voice warm. "You look beautiful." No one had called her beautiful before, and Eliza didn't know how to respond. "Thank you," she managed. "You look very nice as well." And he did. Adam had dressed in what she assumed were his best clothes, a dark suit coat over a crisp white shirt, with a simple string tie at his collar. His hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his stubble, highlighting the strong line of his jaw. He offered his arm. "Shall we?" The hotel restaurant was the finest dining establishment in Copper Creek, which wasn't saying much compared to the restaurants of Boston, but it was still impressive for a frontier town. Oil lamps cast a warm glow over white tablecloths, and a piano player in the corner created a pleasant atmosphere with gentle melodies. As they were shown to their table, Eliza was acutely aware of the stares from other diners. She recognized most of the faces: Mr. Peterson, the bank manager, the Wilsons from the Mercantile, Sheriff Davis and his wife, all watching with undisguised curiosity as Adam held her chair. "I believe we've become the evening's entertainment," Adam murmured as he took his own seat. Eliza kept her eyes fixed on the menu. "I'm not accustomed to such attention." "Nor I," Adam replied, "though I suppose being new in town makes one interesting by default." "It's more than that," Eliza said before she could stop herself. "People don't usually notice me." Adam's eyebrows drew together. How was that possible? The genuine confusion in his voice made something twist in Eliza's chest. "I've always been easy to overlook," she said quietly. "Even as a child. I had a talent for fading into the background." "Well, that explains why you move so quietly," Adam said, his tone lightening. "But I noticed you immediately that first day on the boardwalk. Hard to miss someone who stands so still while the world rushes around them." Eliza looked up, meeting his gaze. "Is that why you spoke to me? Because I was standing still?" "I spoke to you because you looked like someone worth knowing," Adam replied simply. "There was a thoughtfulness in your expression that caught my attention." Before Eliza could respond, the waiter arrived to take their orders. Adam requested the steak, while Eliza chose the chicken, and soon they were left alone again, with 2 glasses of wine between them. "Tell me about Boston," Adam said, leaning slightly forward. "What brought you all the way to Arizona territory?" Eliza took a sip of wine, gathering her thoughts. "My mother died when I was 16, she began. "My father, he's a businessman, quite successful, but he never quite knew what to do with a daughter, especially after mother was gone. When I turned 20, he arranged for me to come west. He had connections with the superintendent of schools in this region, and a position was found for me." "He sent you away?" Adam's voice held a note of disbelief. "It wasn't as harsh as it sounds," Eliza said, though the hurt still lingered. "I think he believed he was doing what was best for me. There were no prospects for me in Boston. I'm not the sort of young woman who attracts suitors, and he thought I might make a life for myself out here. So you've been here a year, teaching other people's children." "Assisting with the teaching," Eliza corrected. "Miss Hargrove makes the important decisions. I mainly help with the younger children." Adam was silent for a moment, studying her with those intense blue eyes that seemed to see too much. "Do you like it here?" The question was so direct, so sincere, that Eliza found herself answering honestly. "No," she admitted, "but I don't dislike it either. It's just life." "A life where you believe you're invisible," Adam said softly. Eliza flinched. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Adam reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. "I see you, Eliza Edelmann. I've seen you from the moment I arrived in this town, and I can't understand why everyone else seems to be looking right through you." Eliza's throat tightened with emotion she couldn't name. Before she could formulate a response, their food arrived, saving her from having to reply immediately. Throughout dinner, Adam told her about his own past, growing up on a small farm in Pennsylvania, joining the Union Army at 18, and his years after the war, working on cattle ranches across Texas and New Mexico, before learning the blacksmith trade. "What made you decide to settle in Copper Creek?" Eliza asked as they shared a slice of apple pie for dessert. Adam's expression turned thoughtful. "I've been moving for so long, I wanted to put down roots somewhere. When I heard old Tucker was looking to retire and sell his smithy, it seemed like the right opportunity at the right time." He paused. "Though I'm beginning to think there might have been other forces at work guiding me here." The warmth in his gaze made Eliza look away, unable to bear the intensity. It was too much to believe that this man, this handsome, kind man who could have his pick of women in town, was genuinely interested in her. After dinner, Adam walked her back to the boarding house, their progress slow and deliberate, as though both were reluctant for the evening to end. The night air was cool, and stars scattered across the clear sky like diamonds on black velvet. "Thank you for joining me tonight," Adam said as they reached the steps of Mrs. Potts's establishment. "I enjoyed it very much," Eliza replied, surprised to realize how true that was. For the first time since arriving in Copper Creek, she'd felt truly present, anchored by Adam's attention in a way that made her feel substantial. "I'd like to see you again," he said. "Perhaps a picnic on Sunday after church. There's a nice spot by the creek just outside of town." Eliza hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'd like that." Adam's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Good night, then, Miss Edelmann," he said, taking her hand and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Until Sunday." As Eliza watched him walk away, she pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the rapid beat of her heart beneath her fingertips. She wasn't invisible, not to him, and that realization was both terrifying and wonderful. The next few days passed in a blur of anticipation. Eliza found herself smiling at unexpected moments, earning curious glances from Miss Hargrove and giggles from the more observant children. Sarah Jenkins, in particular, seemed delighted by the change in her favorite teacher's demeanor. "You look pretty when you smile, Miss Edelmann," the little girl commented after Friday's lessons. "You should do it more often." "Thank you, Sarah," Eliza replied, touched by the child's observation. "I'll try to remember that." Adam had returned to the schoolhouse twice more that week, ostensibly to exchange his book, but lingering each time to chat with Eliza as she completed her end-of-day tasks. Their conversations flowed more easily with each meeting, and Eliza found herself sharing thoughts and dreams she'd never voiced aloud before. "I always wanted to travel," she admitted on Friday afternoon as she swept the schoolroom floor. "To see the great cities of Europe, London, Paris, Rome." "Why don't you?" Adam asked, leaning against a desk as he watched her work. Eliza gave him a wry smile. "It takes money to travel, and a schoolteacher's assistant doesn't earn enough for passage across the ocean. Dreams have a way of finding paths to reality when you least expect it," Adam said. "Don't give up on yours just yet." His unwavering belief in possibilities was refreshing to Eliza, who had long ago resigned herself to the limitations of her circumstances. She found herself wondering what it would be like to face the world with Adam's confidence, to believe that good things might be waiting around the corner. Sunday dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for a picnic. Eliza wore her second-best dress to church, a pale yellow that brought out the golden flecks in her hazel eyes. She noticed Mrs. Jenkins nudging her husband when she entered the church, and several other townsfolk seemed suddenly aware of her presence, nodding in greeting or offering small smiles. Adam was already seated near the back, and he stood as she approached, offering her the space beside him on the wooden pew. Sitting next to him through the service, Eliza was hyper-aware of every movement, every slight brush of his sleeve against hers when he shifted position. The Reverend's sermon about seeing God's blessings in unexpected places seemed particularly poignant that morning. After the service, they walked to the livery where Adam had arranged for a horse and buggy. He'd prepared a basket with cold chicken, bread, cheese, and a bottle of cider, displaying a thoughtfulness that touched Eliza deeply. The spot by the creek was as lovely as Adam had promised, a grassy clearing shaded by cottonwood trees, with the water burbling pleasantly over smooth stones. They spread a blanket on the ground, and Adam helped Eliza sit, treating her with a gentlemanly care she'd never experienced. "This is wonderful," she said, looking around at the peaceful setting. "How did you discover this place?" "I like to ride out early in the mornings sometimes," Adam explained as he unpacked their meal. "Gives me time to think before the day's work begins. I found this spot last week and thought you might enjoy it." They ate companionably, the conversation flowing naturally from the morning sermon to books they'd both read to childhood memories. Adam proved to be a good listener, asking questions that showed genuine interest in her responses. "What about family?" he asked as they sipped their cider. "Do you have siblings back in Boston?" Eliza shook her head. "No, I was an only child. My mother had difficulties after my birth, so there were no more children." She hesitated, then added, "I think that was part of my father's disappointment that I wasn't a son, and there would be no others." Adam's expression darkened. A father's love shouldn't depend on whether his child is a boy or girl. "What about your family?" Eliza asked, eager to shift the focus from herself. "Two younger sisters, both married with children of their own now," Adam said, his expression softening. "My parents are still on the farm in Pennsylvania. I try to write every month, though I'm not always the best correspondent." "You must miss them." "I do," he agreed. "But life carries us where it will sometimes. What about you? Do you write to your father?" Eliza looked down at her hands. At first, the replies grew shorter and less frequent until they stopped altogether about 3 months ago. Adam was quiet for a moment. "His loss," he finally said, his voice gentle. "Some men don't recognize the value of what they have until it's gone." After they finished eating, they walked along the creek, picking up interesting stones and watching small fish dart through the clear water. When they reached a fallen log that stretched partway across the stream, Adam helped Eliza balance as they walked out on it, his hand warm and steady around hers. "Careful now," he cautioned as they reached the end. "Don't want you falling in and catching a chill." As they turned to head back to shore, Eliza's foot slipped on the damp bark. She gasped, teetering for a moment before Adam's arms wrapped securely around her waist, steadying her against his chest. "I've got you," he murmured, his face suddenly very close to hers. Eliza couldn't breathe, couldn't think with his arms around her, and his eyes searching hers with such intensity. For a heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her, but instead, he carefully guided her back to solid ground. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Adam didn't immediately release her, his hands lingering at her waist. "Eliza," he said, using her given name for the first time, "I need to tell you something." Her heart stuttered. "Yes?" "I came to Copper Creek for a specific reason," he said, his expression turning serious. "It wasn't just Tucker's smithy that brought me here." Eliza felt a chill that had nothing to do with the creek water. "What do you mean?" Adam guided her to a nearby boulder where they both sat. 2 years ago, I was working as a blacksmith in Santa Fe. A man came through town, a businessman from Boston named Harold Edelman." Eliza's breath caught. "My father? You met my father?" Adam nodded. "He was there on business, something to do with the railroad. He fell ill during his stay, nothing serious, but enough that the doctor ordered him to rest for a week. His room was above the smithy where I worked, and we got to talking." "He never mentioned being in Santa Fe," Eliza said, confusion washing over her. "He spoke of you," Adam continued. "Showed me a small photograph he carried. He was regretful about sending you away. Said it was the greatest mistake of his life, that he realized too late what he'd done." Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "Then why didn't he write? Why didn't he ask me to come home?" "Pride, perhaps, or fear that you wouldn't forgive him." Adam took her hands in his. "When he learned I was looking to establish my own blacksmith shop, he suggested Copper Creek, said his daughter was there, teaching, and that the town could use a good smith. He paused. He asked me to look out for you, to make sure you were well. The tears spilled over now, running down Eliza's cheeks. So, you sought me out because my father asked you to? Your interest in me was just obligation? Adam's expression turned pained. No, Eliza, that's not. Please take me back to town, she interrupted, standing abruptly. I'd like to go home now. Eliza, let me explain. There's nothing to explain, she said, her voice trembling with hurt. You've fulfilled your promise to my father. You've confirmed I'm alive and well. Your conscience can be clear. The ride back to town was silent and tense. Eliza sat as far from Adam as the buggy seat would allow, staring straight ahead as tears continued to slide down her face. When they reached the boarding house, she climbed down before Adam could assist her. Eliza, please, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Let me finish what I was trying to tell you. Good day, Mr. Vaughn, she replied coldly, before hurrying inside and up to her room. Once alone, Eliza gave in to the sobs that had been building in her chest. How foolish she'd been. Believing that Adam had seen something special in her when no one else did. He'd only noticed her because he was looking for her specifically, fulfilling a promise to her father. His attention, his kindness, it had all been an obligation, nothing more. She didn't leave her room for the rest of the day, ignoring Mrs. Potts's concerned knocks and offers of dinner. When Monday morning arrived, she dressed for school with mechanical precision, her face pale but composed. She would carry on as she always had, invisible to the world, moving through life unnoticed and unremarked. But when she reached the schoolhouse, she found a small package on her desk, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Her name was written across the top in Adam's distinctive handwriting. A young man left that for you just a few minutes ago, Miss Hargrove said from the blackboard. Seemed quite insistent that you receive it. With trembling fingers, Eliza untied the string and unwrapped the paper. Inside was a small wooden box, beautifully carved with delicate flowers along the edges. When she opened it, she found a folded letter and, beneath it, a silver locket. Eliza opened the letter first. Dear Eliza, I understand your anger, and I don't blame you for it. But please, before you judge me too harshly, let me tell you the whole truth. Yes, I came to Copper Creek because your father suggested it. Yes, he asked me to make sure you were well. But what I didn't get to explain yesterday is that I recognized you the moment I saw you on that boardwalk, not from the faded photograph your father showed me, but from the description he gave of his daughter, a young woman so used to being overlooked that she'd become almost invisible to herself. He told me, with tears in his eyes, about the bright, curious child you had been, and how he had failed you after your mother's death, retreating into his grief and his work until he'd pushed you so far away that he didn't know how to bridge the gap. He spoke of his regret and his shame and how he hoped that someday he might find the courage to make amends. I didn't speak to you that first day because of a promise to your father. I spoke to you because in that moment, standing so still amid the bustle of town, you looked like someone whose thoughts I wanted to know. Every conversation since then, every moment in your company, has only confirmed what I suspected from the beginning, that you are remarkable, Eliza Edelmann, whether you believe it or not. The locket belonged to my mother. Inside is a small painting of the farm where I grew up, a place that has always represented home to me. I'd like you to have it as a reminder that you are seen and valued, whether you choose to forgive me or not. Yours, Adam. Eliza opened the locket with unsteady hands. True to his word, there was a tiny, exquisite painting of a farmhouse nestled among rolling hills, with a red barn visible in the background. It was beautiful, intimate, not the sort of gift one gave out of obligation. She closed her eyes, clutching the locket in her palm. Had she misjudged him so completely? Had her own insecurities blinded her to the truth of his intentions? The school day passed in a fog, with Eliza going through the motions of teaching while her mind replayed every interaction with Adam, searching for signs of insincerity and finding none. By the time the children were dismissed, she had made her decision. Instead of returning to the boarding house, she walked directly to the blacksmith shop. The forge was lit, sending waves of heat into the late afternoon air. Adam stood at the anvil, hammering a piece of red-hot metal with powerful, precise strokes. He didn't notice her immediately. focused as he was on his work, and Eliza took the opportunity to really look at him, the concentration in his expression, the strength in his arms, the care with which he shaped the metal beneath his hammer. When he finally looked up and saw her standing in the doorway, he froze, the hammer suspended in midair. "Eliza," he said, her name almost lost beneath the crackling of the forge. She stepped into the shop, her hands clasped in front of her. "I got your gift," she said. "And your letter?" Adam set down his hammer and moved the metal piece back into the forge. "I meant every word," he said, wiping his hands on a nearby cloth. "I know," Eliza replied softly. "I believe you now." The hope that bloomed in his eyes made her heart ache. "You do?" She nodded. "I'm sorry I didn't let you explain yesterday. I've spent so long believing I wasn't worth noticing that, when I found out you had been asked to look for me, it seemed to confirm everything I've always thought about myself." "Eliza," Adam said, moving closer but stopping just short of touching her. "Your father may have pointed me toward Copper Creek, but he didn't make me see you the way I do. That happened all on its own." "How do you see me?" she whispered, needing to hear it. Adam's gaze softened. "I see a woman of quiet strength and deep feeling, someone who has learned to survive being overlooked, but deserves so much more than mere survival." He hesitated, then added, "I see someone I can't stop thinking about, someone whose smile makes my day brighter, whose thoughts fascinate me, whose company I crave." Eliza felt tears gathering again, but these were different from the bitter ones she'd shed the day before. "No one has ever looked at me the way you do," she admitted. "Then everyone else has been blind," Adam said simply. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I'd very much like to kiss you, Eliza Edelmann." "May I?" Her answer was to step forward into the circle of his arms, tilting her face up to his in silent permission. Adam's lips met hers with exquisite gentleness, a whisper of a touch that nonetheless sent warmth cascading through her entire body. His hands cradled her face as though she were made of precious glass, and when he deepened the kiss, Eliza felt something unfolding within her, a sense of being truly seen, truly known, for perhaps the first time in her life. When they finally parted, Adam rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since I first saw you on that boardwalk," he confessed. Eliza laughed softly, a sound of wonder and joy. "I've been wearing your locket," she said, pulling it from beneath her collar to show him. "It's beautiful." "It suits you," Adam replied, his thumb caressing her cheek again. "Eliza, I know this may seem sudden, but I need you to know that my intentions toward you are serious. I came to Copper Creek looking for a place to build a life, and I've found something far more important." "What happens now?" Eliza asked, still scarcely able to believe that this man, this wonderful, perceptive man, wanted her. "Now," Adam said with a smile that made her knees weak, "we get to know each other properly, and if you'll allow it, I'd like to court you, Miss Edelmann, with all the propriety a schoolteacher's assistant deserves." Eliza's own smile felt foreign on her face, unpracticed but genuine. "I think I'd like that very much, Mr. Vaughn." In the weeks that followed, Copper Creek witnessed a remarkable transformation in the quiet assistant teacher who had moved through town largely unnoticed for nearly a year. Eliza Edelmann began to emerge from her self-imposed shadows, her steps more confident, her voice stronger when she spoke to the children or to townspeople on the street. Adam courted her with a thoughtfulness that touched everyone who observed them together. He escorted her to church each Sunday, brought her wildflowers he'd gathered on his morning rides, and was often seen walking with her along the main street in the evenings, deep in conversation. When the town held its harvest dance in late October, it was Adam who led Eliza onto the floor for the first waltz, her yellow dress swirling around her ankles as they moved in the perfect harmony. "People are staring," she murmured as they circled the dance floor. Adam's smile was unconcerned. "Let them stare. You're the most beautiful woman in the room." Eliza no longer blushed at such compliments, having grown accustomed to the genuine admiration in Adam's eyes. "You've ruined me, you know," she said lightly. "I've gotten used to being visible." "Good," he replied, his hand warm against the small of her back. "It's about time the rest of the world caught up with what I saw from the beginning." As October gave way to November, Adam received a letter from his parents in Pennsylvania. They wrote of their pride in his new business and expressed curiosity about the young woman he'd mentioned in his recent letters. "Your father says he remembers meeting her father in Santa Fe," Adam told Eliza as they sat in Mrs. Potts's parlor one evening. "He hopes to meet you someday." "I'd like that," Eliza said, surprised to realize how much she meant it. The idea of family, of belonging to someone, no longer seemed like an impossible dream. They were making plans for Thanksgiving when a telegram arrived from Boston. Eliza's hands trembled as she read the brief message. "Arriving Copper Creek, November 20th. Hope to find you well. Your father." "He's coming here?" she whispered, looking up at Adam in disbelief. "Are you all right?" Adam asked, concerned by her pallor. "I don't know," Eliza admitted. "It's been so long, and we parted on such terms." Adam took her hands in his. "You don't have to see him if you don't want to," he said firmly. "This is your choice, Eliza." She shook her head. "No, I need to see him. There are things that need to be said, questions I need answered." She squeezed his hands. "Will you be with me when he arrives?" "Every step of the way," Adam promised. Harold Edelman arrived on the afternoon stage on November 20th, looking older and grayer than Eliza remembered. She waited at the stage depot with Adam beside her, her back straight and her chin lifted despite the nervousness churning in her stomach. When her father stepped down from the coach and saw her, he stopped abruptly, his face working with emotion. "Eliza," he said, his voice breaking on her name. "My dear girl." Eliza didn't move, couldn't move, frozen by the surge of complicated feelings his presence evoked. It was Adam who stepped forward first, extending his hand. "Mr. Edelman, Adam Vaughn, we met in Santa Fe." Harold shook his hand, his eyes never leaving his daughter's face. "Yes, of course. Thank you for your letters." He hesitated, then addressed Eliza again. "You look well. Strong." "I am well," she replied, finding her voice at last. "This is a surprise, Father. I should have written to tell you I was coming," he acknowledged. "But I wasn't certain. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." The raw honesty in his voice cracked something in Eliza's composure. "Perhaps we could talk somewhere more private," she suggested, gesturing to the crowded depot where curious onlookers were watching their reunion. They walked to the hotel, where Harold had reserved a room, and settled in the small sitting area off the main lobby. Adam positioned himself protectively at Eliza's side, his steady presence giving her courage. "I owe you an apology," Harold began without preamble. "What I did sending you away like that was unforgivable. I've regretted it every day since." "Then why didn't you ask me to come home?" Eliza asked, the question that had burned in her heart for over a year, finally spoken aloud. Harold's shoulders slumped. "Pride, shame, fear that you hated me, and rightfully so." He looked up, his eyes the same hazel as her own, filled with regret. "After your mother died, I couldn't bear to look at you because you reminded me so much of her. It was easier to distance myself, to focus on business, to pretend that the pain would somehow lessen if I didn't have to see her eyes looking back at me from your face every day." Eliza felt tears threatening, but held them back. "That wasn't fair to me," she said quietly. "I lost her too, and then I lost you as well." "No, it wasn't fair," Harold agreed. "It was selfish and cruel, and I have no excuse except that grief can make monsters of even well-intentioned men." He leaned forward. "When I realized what I'd done, how I'd pushed away the one person who mattered most, it was too late. You were already gone, and my letters felt inadequate to express the depth of my remorse." "So you sent Adam to check on me instead," Eliza said, glancing at the man beside her. "I suggested Copper Creek when he mentioned wanting his own smithy," Harold corrected. "Asked him to let me know if you were well. I didn't expect—" He looked between them, noting their closeness. "Well, I certainly didn't expect this development, though I can't say I'm displeased by it." Adam's hand found Eliza's, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Your daughter is an extraordinary woman, Mr. Edelman. I'm grateful every day that you pointed me toward Copper Creek." Harold nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "I can see that." He turned back to Eliza. "I've come to ask you to forgive me, though I know I have no right to expect it, and to ask if you might consider coming home to Boston, at least for a visit. The house is empty without you." Eliza was quiet for a long moment, processing her father's words, the sincerity in his voice, the hope and fear mingled in his expression. Finally, she said, "I have a life here now. Friends, my students. Adam." She felt Adam's hand tighten around hers. "I don't think I can simply return to Boston as though nothing happened." Harold's face fell, but he nodded in understanding. "Of course, I understand. But," Eliza continued, "I would like to try to rebuild what was broken between us. Perhaps you could stay in Copper Creek for a while, get to know the life I've made here." Hope bloomed in her father's eyes. "I'd like that very much. I've arranged to be away from business until after the new year." "Then we have time," Eliza said, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "Time to talk, to understand each other better." As they left the hotel, Adam pulled Eliza aside, while her father went ahead to arrange for his luggage to be brought to his room. "Are you all right?" he asked, searching her face. Eliza nodded, surprising herself with how true it was. "I think I am. There's still so much to say, so much to work through, but it feels like a beginning rather than an ending." Adam brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "You're incredible, you know that? Your capacity for forgiveness, for seeing the best in people despite everything, it's one of the things I love most about you." The word hung in the air between them, spoken for the first time. Eliza's breath caught. "Adam?" His smile was tender, his eyes certain. "I love you, Eliza Edelmann. I think I've been falling in love with you since that first day on the boardwalk, and every day since has only deepened that feeling." Eliza felt joy bubble up inside her, bright and effervescent. "I love you too," she whispered, the words coming easily, naturally, as though they'd been waiting to be spoken all along. Adam leaned down, brushing his lips against hers in a brief, sweet kiss. "Your father's watching?" he murmured against her mouth. "Let him watch," Eliza replied with newfound confidence. "I'm not invisible anymore." The weeks leading up to Christmas were filled with gradual healing, as Eliza and her father rebuilt their relationship one conversation at a time. Harold took a genuine interest in her life in Copper Creek, visiting the schoolhouse to observe her teaching and joining her and Adam for dinner several times a week. He spoke of her mother more freely than he ever had before, sharing stories that filled in gaps in Eliza's memories and brought tears to both their eyes. "She would be so proud of the woman you've become," Harold told Eliza one evening as they sat by the fire in the hotel's sitting room. "Much stronger than I ever was." Adam, who had been quietly observing their conversation, spoke up. "Mr. Edelman, there's something I'd like to discuss with you, if I may." Harold's eyebrows rose. "Of course, young man." Adam glanced at Eliza, a question in his eyes. When she nodded, understanding his intent, he turned back to her father. "I love your daughter, sir, and I've asked her to marry me." Harold looked between them, his expression unreadable for a moment before breaking into a smile. "And what did she say to this proposal?" "I said yes," Eliza answered, unable to contain her own smile. "We wanted to tell you together." Harold stood, extending his hand to Adam. "Then you have my blessing and my sincere congratulations. I couldn't wish for a better man for my daughter." He turned to Eliza, opening his arms. "May I?" Eliza stepped into her father's embrace for the first time in years, feeling the circle of their family begin to heal. "Thank you, Father," she whispered. On Christmas Eve, the entire town gathered for a celebration at the church, with a special dinner afterward in the town hall. Eliza wore a new dress, a deep green velvet that Adam had commissioned from the dressmaker as an early Christmas gift. As they entered the hall together, followed by her father, Eliza was struck by how different everything felt from just a few months ago. People called out greetings as they passed. Children from the school ran up to show her the small gifts they had received, and Mrs. Jenkins pulled her aside to share the news that she was expecting another baby in the summer. "We'll need you to help prepare Sarah for being a big sister," the woman said warmly. "She thinks the world of you, you know." "I'd be happy to," Eliza replied, touched by the woman's confidence in her. Later, as the fiddles struck up a lively tune and couples took to the dance floor, Adam led Eliza to the center of the room. "May I have this dance, future Mrs. Vaughn?" he asked with a theatrical bow. Eliza laughed, placing her hand in his. "You may indeed, Mr. Vaughn." As they moved through the steps of the dance, Eliza caught sight of her father watching from the side of the room, his expression one of contentment. When the music ended, Adam kept hold of her hand and led her to where Harold stood. "I have something for both of you," he said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small velvet box. It arrived on yesterday's stage. Eliza accepted the box with curiosity, opening it to find a delicate gold ring set with a modest diamond flanked by 2 smaller emeralds. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It was your mother's engagement ring," Harold explained. "I had it resized for you." He turned to Adam. "I hope you don't mind, son. I thought it would be a way for her to be part of your new beginning." Adam's eyes shone with emotion. "It's perfect," he said. "Thank you." With gentle reverence, he took the ring from its box and slipped it onto Eliza's finger. It fit perfectly, catching the light from the oil lamps overhead and sending prisms dancing across her skin. "A proper engagement deserves a proper announcement," Harold said, raising his voice slightly. "May I have everyone's attention, please?" The room quieted, all eyes turning toward them. Eliza felt a momentary flutter of her old anxiety at being the center of attention, but it faded as Adam's arms settled around her waist, anchoring her. "I'm delighted to announce the engagement of my daughter, Eliza Edelmann, to Adam Vaughn," Harold proclaimed. "The wedding will take place this spring, and you're all invited to celebrate with us." A cheer went up from the assembled townspeople, followed by a flurry of congratulations and well wishes. Eliza found herself embraced by women who had barely acknowledged her existence months before, while men clapped Adam on the shoulder and offered good-natured advice about married life. In the midst of the celebration, Eliza slipped outside for a moment, needing a breath of the crisp winter air. She stood on the steps of the town hall, looking up at the star-filled sky, marveling at how dramatically her life had changed since that day Adam had first spoken to her on the boardwalk. The door opened behind her, and Adam stepped out, draping his coat around her shoulders. "Escaping your own engagement celebration?" he teased gently. Eliza leaned back against his chest as his arms encircled her waist. "Just catching my breath. It's a bit overwhelming, being seen by so many people all at once." Adam pressed a kiss to her temple. "Too much?" "No," she said thoughtfully. "Just different. I spent so long believing I was invisible that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be part of something larger than myself." "And now?" Adam asked, his breath warm against her ear. Eliza turned in his arms, looking up into the face of the man who had first truly seen her. "Now I know that being visible isn't about having everyone's attention. It's about being fully present in your own life and having people who see you for exactly who you are." She reached up, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "You taught me that, Adam Vaughn." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You were never invisible, Eliza. You just needed to be seen by the right eyes." As they stood together beneath the winter stars, Eliza knew with absolute certainty that she had finally found her place in the world, not in Boston or even in Copper Creek, but in the heart of this man, who looked at her as though she were the only woman in existence. The winter passed in a whirl of preparations for both the wedding and the future Adam and Eliza would build together. They decided to hold the ceremony in early April, when the desert would be briefly painted with wildflowers before the summer heat set in. Harold extended his stay through the wedding, moving from the hotel to a small house he rented near the school, determined to be part of his daughter's new life. Eliza continued teaching, though she and Miss Hargrove had reached an understanding that she would leave her position after the wedding to help Adam expand the blacksmith business. "He wants to add a small store," she explained to her father over dinner one evening in February. "Selling household goods and tools he makes himself, as well as items ordered from back east. He thinks I have a good eye for what people might need." "A fine idea," Harold approved. "The town is growing. There will be demand for quality merchandise." He hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about making an investment in the business, if you and Adam would consider it. A wedding gift of sorts." Eliza looked up in surprise. "An investment?" "I've been impressed by Adam's craftsmanship and business sense," Harold explained. "And frankly, I've been looking for an opportunity to establish connections in this region. The railroad is expanding west, and having family interests along the route would be advantageous." The evening Adam came home to find Harold Edelman and his future father-in-law deep in conversation over ledgers and business plans, he knew he'd found not just a wife, but a true partner in life. Together, they would build something meaningful in Copper Creek, a legacy that combined his skills with her intelligence and her father's business acumen. As winter thawed into spring, Eliza found herself standing before the mirror in her room at Mrs. Potts's boarding house, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. Gone was the invisible girl who had arrived in Copper Creek nearly 2 years ago. In her place stood a confident young woman with bright eyes and a ready smile, wearing a wedding gown of ivory silk that her father had ordered from San Francisco. "You look beautiful, child," Mrs. Potts said from the doorway, her eyes misty with tears. Like a proper bride. Eliza smoothed her hands over the delicate fabric. "It still doesn't seem quite real," she admitted. "All of this Adam, father, the shop we're planning. Sometimes I fear I'll wake up and find it was all a dream." Mrs. Potts chuckled. "No dream, my dear. That young man of yours is real as can be, and he's waiting at the church looking like he might burst with pride." A knock at the door announced Harold's arrival. He stopped in the doorway, his expression softening as he took in the sight of his daughter in her wedding gown. "You look just like your mother," he said softly. Eliza felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "Do I really?" Harold nodded, coming to stand beside her. The same grace, the same quiet strength. He offered his arm. "Ready to become Mrs. Vaughn?" The church was filled to capacity, with every resident of Copper Creek turned out to witness the union of their blacksmith and the schoolteacher who had somehow become an integral part of their community, without anyone quite noticing when it happened. Adam waited at the altar, his usual work clothes exchanged for a fine black suit, his face solemn until he caught sight of Eliza on her father's arm. Then his expression transformed into one of such undisguised joy that a murmur ran through the congregation. As Harold placed Eliza's hand in Adam's, he whispered something that made the younger man nod seriously before turning his full attention to his bride. They spoke their vows clearly, their voices carrying to the back of the church, promising to love and cherish each other for all the days of their lives. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Adam drew Eliza into a kiss that started out properly restrained, but deepened into something that had several of the older ladies in the congregation fanning themselves vigorously. "I believe that's quite enough, Mr. Vaughn," Eliza murmured against his lips, though her eyes sparkled with amusement. "Just making sure everyone knows you're mine now," Adam replied with a wink. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing and more food than the town had seen since the previous harvest festival. Harold had spared no expense, wanting his daughter's wedding to be remembered for years to come. As the night drew to a close, Adam led Eliza away from the festivities toward the house. They would now share a comfortable 2-story home he had purchased just beyond the edge of town, with enough land for a garden and perhaps someday for children to play. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vaughn," he said, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Eliza laughed, her arms around his neck. "This feels like the beginning of a very grand adventure." "The grandest," Adam agreed, setting her gently on her feet once they were inside. "And I can't imagine anyone I'd rather share it with than the woman who caught my eye that day on the boardwalk." "The invisible girl," Eliza said with a small smile. Adam shook his head, drawing her close. "You were never invisible to me, Eliza. From the first moment I saw you, you were the only one I could see." And as he kissed her in the home they would fill with love and laughter in the years to come, Eliza knew with absolute certainty that she would never feel invisible again. 5 years later, Eliza stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Adam taught their 4-year-old son, Henry, how to gently pet the new foal born to their mare just days before. Their daughter Charlotte, barely 2, was perched on her father's shoulders, her small hands buried in his hair as she squealed with delight at the sight of the wobbly-legged colt. The Vaughn Mercantile and Smithy had grown into one of the most successful businesses in the region, with Adam's craftsmanship drawing customers from as far as Tucson. Eliza managed the store portion of the enterprise, using her keen eye for quality and her understanding of the community's needs to stock exactly what their growing customer base required. Harold visited twice a year, staying for a month each time, doting on his grandchildren and bringing news from Boston. He'd semi-retired, leaving most of his business in the hands of capable managers while he pursued other interests, including a recently developed passion for photography, which had resulted in beautiful portraits of his daughter's family that now hung in both their Arizona home and his Boston mansion. Copper Creek had grown as well, nearly doubling in size with the arrival of the railroad 2 years earlier. The school where Eliza had once taught now employed 3 teachers, and a proper hotel had replaced the modest establishment where her father had stayed during his first visit. "Mama, look!" Henry called, his small hand resting on the foal's velvet nose. "He likes me." Eliza descended the porch steps, joining her family in the paddock. "Of course he does, sweetheart. You're being very gentle, just like Papa showed you." Adam shifted Charlotte to his hip, making room for Eliza under his free arm. "I was thinking," he said as they watched the mare nuzzle her foal, "maybe it's time we took a trip east. Let your father show the children Boston." Eliza looked up at him in surprise. "You want to go to Boston?" "I was thinking beyond that, actually," Adam admitted. "Your father mentioned that passage to Europe is quite reasonable these days, and, well, you always wanted to see London and Paris." Eliza's heart skipped a beat. "Are you serious? With 2 small children?" "Charlotte would be nearly 3 by the time we arranged everything," Adam reasoned, "and your father has offered to come along, help manage the little ones when we want time to ourselves." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You've helped me build my dreams here, Eliza. I want to help you fulfill yours as well." Tears pricked at Eliza's eyes as she stood surrounded by the family she had once never dared to imagine a husband who still looked at her as though she were the most precious thing in his world. Children who filled their days with laughter and discovery. A father who had found his way back to her through regret and redemption. "My dreams are already fulfilled," she said softly, rising on tiptoe to press a kiss to Adam's lips. "But I wouldn't say no to Paris in the spring." Adam's laughter mingled with the children's excited questions about the mysterious places called London and Paris, creating a melody that wrapped around Eliza's heart like the sweetest of embraces. She had traveled so far from the invisible girl she'd once been, truly finding herself in the eyes of the man who had seen her when no one else did. And as the Arizona sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Eliza Edelmann Vaughn knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be visible, valued, and completely, irrevocably loved.